Welcome to the Black Swan Rising podcast, an L10 production. For transcriptions, show notes, and extras, please visit us at theblackswanrisingpodcast.com. Now, broadcasting across the world from the heart of the American Bible Belt, here is your host, Michael B. Rush.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Black Swan Rising podcast. I'm your host, Michael B. Rush. Friends, this is going to be the last episode in a while, probably a couple of months. I've got a wedding coming up, missionaries coming home. I've got 2 family reunions. I've got some family vacations. I've got young women's camp and young men's camp. Busy couple of months. And so we're going to be taking a little break from this, probably picking it back up in July. Now, one other thing that I'd like to put out there, I'm not just going to be sitting on my laurels and not doing anything during this time. I am working diligently on a Book of Enoch reference guide. As many of you may know, I have written a 3-volume commentary on the Book of Enoch. It's probably 1,200 pages plus long. And I know that is probably more than most people want to commit to. And I just love the Book of Enoch, and I want it to be as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. So this reference guide that I'm working on is meant to facilitate that. It basically just shows the Book of Enoch in the original textual form in a verse-by-verse format, just like you'd see it in the Bible. That will be the first section. And then I have a second section, which shows all the same verses on the left side of the page. And then on the right side of the page, it has my notes as to what the verses mean. And incorporated into my notes are a bunch of other scriptures that relate to that passage, as well as other passages within the Book of Enoch itself that are related to that passage. And then lastly, in the 3-volume Book of Enoch series that I have written, it shows all of the page numbers and volume numbers where I discuss those topics. Now, there have been a couple of different iterations of these different volumes of the Book of Enoch that I have put out. So the page numbers are going to correspond with the different volumes editions that are available on Amazon as of right now. Most of those on Amazon have not changed for some time, but just keep in mind that all of the page numbers are going to be related to the most current editions of each of those 3 volumes. So if you have a prior or an old edition, you might be a little frustrated with this commentary because the page numbers may not correspond. If you've got the most recent edition, or if it hasn't been too long since you bought that, then they should line up perfectly for you. But anyway, this is something that I'm working on. I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be a really cool tool. And then, of course, the last section in this reference guide is going to be a topical guide, which will show all of the different subjects that are covered in the Book of Enoch. It will include everywhere that I discuss all of those different topics throughout the series, and it will show all the different scriptures that I think are related and support a thorough investigation of those topics. So I'm hoping that this will be a tool that will be very helpful to most people. Now let's jump in to today's episode. And I'm excited about this episode because we're going to be talking about one of my favorite revelations of modern time. And this is found in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 133. Now, this revelation was given in November of 1831. So this is just, a year and 7 months or so since the church was founded on April 6th of 1830. And it's really coming right on the heels of the translation of the Pearl of Great Price. So as we go through this section, that is the context that we are going to need to understand it from. And I think that if you look at it from that context, it's going to make much more sense. So without any further ado, I would like to just read this verse by verse and discuss my thoughts on it, because in my opinion, this section is just fabulous. Okay. So we start with verse 1. Hearken, O ye people of my church, saith the Lord your God, and hear the word of your Lord concerning the Lord who shall suddenly come to his temple, the Lord who shall come down upon the world with a curse to judgment, yea, upon all the nations that forget God, and upon all the ungodly amongst you. Now let's stop right there, because that word ungodly, this is a Book of Enoch word. If you look into the New Testament and the book of Jude, Jude uses this word a lot, ungodly. And Jude is, of course, quoting the book of Enoch when he does. And in the book of Enoch, it talks about how the second coming of the Lord is going to result in the elimination or the purification of all the ungodly upon the world. And this is what the Lord is talking about when he's referring to the judgment that is going to come upon the ungodly. He is talking about this from the context of the book of Enoch. The book of Enoch is probably the most important book regarding the last days that anyone could possibly have available to them. It's the opening verse of the book of Enoch says that it was written for those who will be present during the days of trial when the Lord destroys the wicked. In other words, the ungodly. So it's meant to help the elect to prepare. And this section is also meant to help the elect to prepare for what is about to take place. Because in the context of the Black Swan Rising podcast, the events of the last day, they will all be Black Swan style events. And in fact, the next verse, verse 3, makes that very clear. For he, meaning God, shall make bare his holy arm in the eyes of all the nations, and all the ends of the earth shall see the salvation of their God. When God is saying that his arm will be made bare for all of the nations are going to know without a doubt that he is God when this happens. And this kind of an event can only be brought to pass in the context of Black Swan events, things that nobody saw coming, but that completely change the course of history. Nothing will ever be the same once the arm of the Lord is made bare in the eyes of all nations. Now we go to verse 4. Wherefore prepare ye, O my people. Sanctify yourselves. Gather ye together, O ye people of my church, upon the land of Zion, all you that have not been commanded to tarry. Go ye out from Babylon. Be ye clean that bear the vessels of the Lord. In the last episode that we did, which was on the New Jerusalem, we learned how the righteous are going to be gathered out from Babylon, or from all the nations of the world, and will be brought into the New Jerusalem, which will be a city of refuge in a time of incredible turmoil. When the Lord is saying to come out of Babylon, he is equating Babylon with the world, with all of the nation states that are preaching things that go against his gospel. And really, this isn't even about nation states. It's about the philosophies of men. And when the Lord says that we need to be separate, he's saying this from the perspective or the context of the Hebrew concept of kadosh. Now, kadosh means to be separate or to be set apart, and it's typically translated as to be holy. So when the Lord is asking us to come out from Babylon, to separate ourselves from Babylon, what he is really asking us to do is to become holy, to leave the world behind and to keep our eyes on the prize, which is his kingdom and his work and his glory. That's the context for this reference to Babylon and to come out from Babylon. So now we move to verse 6. Call your solemn assemblies and speak often one to another, and let every man call upon the name of the Lord. Yea, verily I say unto you, the time has come when the voice of the Lord is given unto you. Go ye out of Babylon, gather ye out from amongst the nations, from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Now, this is a really important couple of verses here. The Lord says that we need to call our solemn assemblies. We read about solemn assemblies in Joel chapter 2, and they are spoken of in the context of the preservation of the saints in the days of trial. The leaders of the people call the solemn assemblies, and they petition the Lord for deliverance of Zion. And that is what the Lord is saying that we need to be doing. We need to be seeking him that we might be delivered. In the context of Joel chapter 2, it is the Lord's army that is coming, purge the land of all of its wicked inhabitants. Joel chapter 2 is a pretty interesting chapter, and I encourage you to go and reread that in the context of these solemn assemblies. Now, in verse 7, the Lord says that we need to gather ourselves from amongst the four. He gives us three places that we need to gather ourselves from. First, gather ye out from amongst the nations. Second, from the four winds. And third, from one end of heaven to the other. Now, this is really interesting because this revelation is from Jesus Christ. Every single word that he speaks has profound meaning. He doesn't use filler words. He's not saying these things so that he can get a certain word count in his discourse. He says these things because each of these things is very meaningful. What does it mean? It means that Zion, the New Jerusalem, will come forth from all of the nations of the earth. Anywhere the wind blows, the people of Zion will come from. But then he says that they will also come from one end of heaven to the other. This is very curious because that the heavens go beyond the earth. So there are folks that are going to be gathered as part of the events of the last days when the arm of the Lord is made bare in all of the eyes of all of the nations. That is going to result in some sort of cosmic gathering. Now, we already talked last week how the New Jerusalem is going to be visited by the righteous from all the works of the Father's hands. So the New Jerusalem is going to already be a galactic, really, a gathering center for the entire multiverse, not just the Milky Way galaxy. And the gathering that is going to be taking place is going to involve, now, if you look at this specifically, this phrase, from one end of heaven to the other, to me, it conjures up our Deuteronomy chapter 33, when Moses is speaking to the Israelites right before they enter into the lands of promise. And Moses doesn't go with them. The house of Israel follows Joshua, and Moses is actually translated. The Lord takes him. And the reason why the Lord takes him, we'll get into that in a little bit. But as we've already mentioned in prior episodes, Joseph Smith taught that people are translated so that they can administer to the inhabitants of other worlds. So we know that Moses has to be involved with the inhabitants of other worlds because he was translated. So now let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 4. Again, the whole reason that we're talking about this is we're just digging into this phrase that was found in Doctrine and Covenants section 133, where the Lord said that he was going to gather folks from one end of heaven to the other. Moses used that same phrase in verse 4. If any of thine will be driven out unto the uttermost parts of heaven. From thence will the Lord thy God gather thee, and from thence will he fetch thee. So this phrase has to do with the gathering of Israel, which apparently is going to take place beyond the confines of planet Earth. You can think back to Revelation chapter 12, where you have this vision of this woman with the wings of an eagle, and she's given those wings so that she can fly away from the face of the dragon and rest for a time. And of course, the dragon is defined as Lucifer and his angels, which were banished to the earth. If this woman was able to escape the influence of the dragon with these wings of a great eagle that she was given, it was because she was enabled to leave the earth. And the Lord is saying that before he comes again, Israel will be restored upon the earth, even if that involves them coming from the ends of heaven. Now we move to verse 8. Send forth the elders of my church into the nations which are afar off, unto the islands of the sea. Send forth unto foreign lands. Call upon all nations, first upon the Gentiles, and then upon the Jews. The Lord gives a specific order in which the gospel is meant to be proclaimed. It is first to be taken to the Gentiles, and last it is to be taken to the Jews. Now, why do the Gentiles receive it first and the Jews receive it last? This goes back to the well-known phrase, anytime we are referring to the restoration of the house of Israel in the last days, this phrase comes up, and it's the first shall be last and the last shall be first. So when you look at the origination of the gospel preaching when Christ came the first time, the Jews received it first, and the Gentiles received it last. And so in the last days, the Gentiles receive it before the Jews. The term Gentile is confusing for a lot of people, and really all it means, it's essentially for putting people into buckets. You have the Jews, which is one bucket, and a Gentile means anyone who is not a Jew. So when you look at it from that perspective, you would have the Jews and any other non-descendant, anyone who did not descend from Judah could be considered a Gentile from this perspective. The Samaritans, they had the blood of Israel amongst them. They were considered Gentiles. They were considered worse than Gentiles by the Jews because they were mixed. When you read in the Book of Mormon, the authors of the Book of Mormon, they considered themselves to be part of the Jewish culture because they came to the Americas from Jerusalem. So they continued that same usage of the term Gentile as meaning somebody that wasn't them or the Jews. So oftentimes when you are looking in the Book of Mormon and you come across the term Gentile, oftentimes it just is referring to someone that is not either from the Nephites themselves, meaning from their era, or from the Jews. Oftentimes the term Gentile in the Book of Mormon is referring to the latter-day Edomites, the people that would be from the lineage of Joseph and Asenath in America. So that's all the term Gentile means. It's used here to separate usually into, it's a very binary term. You're either this group or you're a Gentile. You're either a Jew or you're a Gentile. It's not necessarily, in other words, it's an incredibly broad grouping. But from this perspective, the Gentiles will receive the gospel before the Jews will. And the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is actually under an agreement with the state of Israel that they will not proselyte to them. This goes along with verse 8 here. The Jews will be the last to receive the fullness of the gospel. And they are going to get on the train once Jesus Christ returns, and they look at the wounds in his hands and say, whoa, hold on here. Where did you get these? And as Isaiah says, they will mourn for one who mourns for their only son. Now we move to verse, and behold, and lo, this shall be their cry, and the voice of the Lord unto all people. Go ye forth unto the land of Zion, that the borders of my people may be enlarged, that her stakes may be strengthened, and that Zion may go forth unto the regions round about. Now, what does this mean? Again, we go back to the theme of gathering Zion in from the four winds. This is gathering Israel on both sides of the veil. This is the work that has been given to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So now let's move on to verse 10. Yea, let the cry go forth amongst all people. Awake and arise and go forth to meet the bridegroom. Behold, and lo, the bridegroom cometh. Go ye out to meet him. Prepare yourselves for the great day of the Lord. Watch therefore, for ye know neither the day nor the hour. Let them therefore who are amongst the Gentiles flee unto Zion, and let them who be of Judah flee unto Jerusalem, unto the mountains of the Lord's house. Now this is interesting because according to Jesus Christ, there are going to be two separate gathering points. One for the Jews, which will be Jerusalem, and then you have the New Jerusalem in North America, where everyone else must go for refuge. This, again, is the general bucket that we were talking about for the Gentiles. The New Jerusalem is for everyone else. The Jerusalem of old, that's reserved specifically for the Jewish people, because that is the land of their inheritance. Now, the New Jerusalem, that is the inheritance of Joseph, as we talked about in last week's episode. And the vast majority of the people that are accepting the gospel today are affiliated with Joseph. Now, if they're not from either the tribe of Ephraim or Manasseh, they are affiliated with Joseph in that they are doing the works of the children of Joseph. And that is very important because you will recall when the Jews were touting their lineage to Jesus Christ, said, listen, if you guys really were the children of Abraham, you would be doing the works of Abraham. So the children of Joseph are those that are doing the works of Joseph. Said another way, those that will inherit the New Jerusalem are those that are engaged in this work of gathering Israel on both sides of the veil. Those are they that are going to inherit the New Jerusalem. So you have these two separate gathering points. Now, something really interesting is that Jesus Christ says in verse 13 that the Jews should flee unto Jerusalem, unto the mountains of the Lord's house. Now, for those of you that are familiar with Jerusalem, that have actually been there and know the topography and the history of that land, you know that the mountain of the Lord's house refers to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which is actually built on top of Mount Moriah. And mountaintops are typically not level places, and you actually have these big stone arches that are built underneath the Temple Mount to create this space. But this is a big flat space where the temple sat anciently. Now, there are prophecies that the temple will be restored to Jerusalem in the last days. Ezekiel saw this temple in existence in his day, and that it would be it would be present in Jerusalem in the last days. But curiously, when he saw this temple in vision, it was not in Jerusalem when he was seeing it. It was somewhere else, meaning that this is going to be a miraculous event. This is going to be very similar to the coming of the city center of the New Jerusalem, which we learned will descend from the heavens. When you read Ether chapter 13, verse 3, you learn that there are two things that are descending from heaven: the New Jerusalem and the holy sanctuary of the Lord. Now, the sanctuary of the Lord, that is a temple. So the New Jerusalem, which John says there are no temples in the New Jerusalem because the presence of God the Father and Jesus Christ within the New Jerusalem make the entire city a temple. So this sanctuary that will be descending from heaven, I believe we're talking about two things coming down. One to Zion in America, and one to Zion in the lands of the Jews. And that will be the Lord's house. Now, in the Book of Enoch, Enoch sees this house of everlasting dominion that was built a long time ago. He saw that there was a structure on the Temple Mount that would be existing in the last days, and that structure would be folded up and carried off safely and set somewhere else in the southern part of Israel. And that this new structure, I say new, it's going to be new to the Temple Mount, but it was already thousands of years old. It will descend from the heavens and come down onto the Temple Mount. That's what I believe the Jews are to gather to. And when that happens, it's going to be miraculous. It's going to go back to the arm of the Lord being revealed in the eyes of all nations. These are miraculous things that are happening that everyone is aware of because they're looking at CNN and seeing this structure come down from the heavens in the eyes of all nations. And one of these structures will descend upon the Temple Mount. And along with this structure will be two prophets that are spoken of in the book of Revelation that will be sent to preserve the Jews until the Lord comes. That's the context that we are to understand those verses from. So now we pick up again in verse 14. Go ye out from amongst the nations, even from Babylon, from the midst of the wickedness, which is spiritual Babylon. Now, we spoke a little bit about this already. The Lord wants us to sanctify ourselves. He does not want us to be just like the world in which we are living. We need to live in the world, but not be part of it. We need to sanctify ourselves. This is, again, going back to the whole concept of kadosh, where we are becoming holy. And we become holy by separating ourselves from the unclean things of the world. Now, what are the unclean things of the world? There are many things that are quite obvious. Pornography, the lusts of the flesh, customs that are unbecoming of true disciples of Jesus Christ. These are obvious things that we should be leaving behind and separating ourselves from. But at a more general perspective, there are many things that we are probably participating in that we need to ask ourselves, listen, are these the kinds of things that we should be immersing ourselves in? And this is going to become a little more meaningful as the narrative continues. But so let's pick up back in verse 15. But verily, thus saith the Lord, let not your flight be in haste, but let all things be prepared before you. For he that goeth, let him not look back, lest sudden destruction shall come upon him. So what is this concept of coming out amongst the wicked and not looking back, lest a sudden destruction come upon you? This is referring to, obviously, Lot's wife, who was commanded with Lot and Lot's family to come out from amongst the wicked. You will recall that Abraham tried to advocate for the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and the Lord said, yeah, you bet. If you can find 10 righteous people there, I will save those cities for the sake of those 10 righteous people. Of course, there were not 10 righteous people. The only people that came out of Sodom and Gomorrah were Lot and his 2 daughters, and his wife turned back, meaning she really didn't want to leave. She missed it, or was going to miss it too much. Her heart was involved in the things of the world and longed for those things. So this is the kind of check that we need to have for ourselves. Where is our heart? Are we capable of physically coming out from the wicked, but still our heart is longing for those kinds of things? If so, we need to make that a priority so that we can not only separate ourselves physically, but also have control of our hearts and our minds. Now we go to verse 16. Hearken and hear, O ye inhabitants of the earth. Listen, elders of my church, together, and hear the voice of the Lord. For he calleth upon all men, and he commandeth all men everywhere to repent. For behold, the Lord God hath sent forth the angel crying through the midst of heaven, saying, Prepare ye the way of the Lord, and make his path straight, for the hour of his coming is nigh. Okay, that language there, prepare ye the way of the Lord, and make his paths straight. These are the words of Elias. Elias simply means the forerunner. John the Baptist was the forerunner in Christ's day, and he said these same things. So the Lord is saying that the angel of the Lord has already been sent and proclaimed this. There has been an Elias, or a forerunner, already who has come and has said these same things. Now, curiously enough, there is a section in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 77, that refers to the Elias that is going to come and restore all things, including the house of Israel. And that Elias, according to that section, is John the Revelator. Now, John the Revelator has already come. He came and conferred the Melchizedek priesthood on the head of Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery and gave us all of the keys that we needed to be able to prepare the way of the Lord. Now we move to verse 18. When the Lamb shall stand upon Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having the Father's name written upon their foreheads. Now, if you recall from last week's episode, we mentioned that the 144,000, 12,000 from every tribe, will be sent forth into all the nations of the earth to gather in the righteous into Zion, the New Jerusalem. That is what this is referring to. This gathering is going to be taking place from the elders of Israel on both sides of the veil, but there are also going to be supernatural components of this gathering that we would be unable to do ourselves if not for this incredible outpouring of power that will be realized through these 144,000. And again, when you make a study of the 144,000, I think a lot of people don't have a scriptural based understanding of these 144,000. They were already selected for this job. They were selected before the close of the sixth seal. And when you read in Revelation, it says that they go everywhere with Jesus Christ. They're not separated from him night or day. And that all of them are virgins and that they are the first fruits, meaning that they have come forth from prior generations and have been resurrected. And that is going to enable them to fulfill the missions that the Lord has given them. Gathering of Israel. Now, the Book of Enoch talks also about these 144,000. And specifically, Enoch says that they receive sevenfold instruction regarding all things in the heavens. Their role is going to be more than just the gathering of Israel into the New Jerusalem. They're engaged in something pretty epic that requires them having a sevenfold understanding of the working of the cosmos. And that's pretty darn awesome. So now we go to verse 19. Wherefore, prepare ye for the coming of the bridegroom. Go ye out to meet him. For behold, he shall stand upon the mount of Olivet, and upon the mighty ocean, even the great deep, and upon the isles of the sea, upon the land of Zion. And he shall utter his voice out of Zion, and he shall speak from Jerusalem, and his voice shall be heard amongst all people. So what is this talking about? There's a couple of things that I'd like to highlight here. One is that when the Lord comes to Jerusalem, he is going to make his appearance on the Mount of Olives. And if you read the prophecies about when Christ comes, they say very clearly that he is going to divide the Mount of Olives in half. And that will create a pathway for the Jews to escape from the Antichrist and the beast and their armies, who will have, by this point, overcome the two prophets that were sent to preserve the Jews, but they will have died and been lifted up into heaven. And so the Antichrist and the beast are going to be ruling Jerusalem. And so Jesus Christ is going to split the Mount of Olives and prepare a path for the Jews to escape from Jerusalem. And then from that point forward, Jesus Christ is going to fight the battle of the Jews for them. And of course, that does not go very well for the Antichrist and the beast. When you read in Revelation chapter 19, it says that Jesus Christ takes both the false prophet and the beast while they are still alive and casts them into a lake of burning fire. That's what this is talking about here. Now, another thing that is really interesting, Christ uses the phrase that he will stand upon the mighty ocean, even the great deep. Now, this is really interesting. The Lord doesn't usually refer to the great ocean as the great deep. Usually he calls, in fact, in this revelation, he refers to the regular ocean as the sea. In fact, you read that in verse 68. Behold, at my rebuke, I dry up the sea, and I make the rivers a wilderness, and their fish stink and die for thirst. When he's making that reference, he's not referring that at his rebuke, he dries up the mighty ocean and the great deep. He just calls it simply the sea. There is something peculiar. And again, this is Jesus Christ, the most intelligent being of which we have any concept. In the book of Abraham, in Abraham chapter 3, Jesus Christ is talking to Abraham and he shows him the spirits that existed before the world was. And he says, Abraham, look, anytime you have two spirits, one will be more intelligent than the other. That's just a fact. And then he says, Abraham, I am more intelligent than they all. Jesus Christ is beyond anything that we can conceive in his intelligence. So when he is using these terms differently, there is a reason for that. I just want to point that out. He uses the term great deep here, and it's a mysterious term. It's very different. Something the great deep versus the sea, there's meaning there. When you refer to the great deep, you're referring to the fact that its depths are mysterious. They're not knowable to us. What this is conjuring up in my mind is that there is going to be great mystery when the Lord returns, and people are going to see these mysteries unfolding in real time, and they're going to be shocked by it. Even the inhabitants of the isles of the sea are going to be shocked by these things. Okay. Now we move to verse 21. And he shall utter his voice out of Zion, and he shall speak from Jerusalem, and his voice shall be heard amongst all people. Zion and Jerusalem in this instance are two separate places. Zion is the New Jerusalem, where everybody in the other bucket that is non-Jewish will be gathered. And then Jerusalem, of course, will be a gathering point of the Jews. And the voice of the Lord will come out of both of those locations. Now in verse 22, and it shall be a voice as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder, which shall break down the mountains, and the valleys shall not be found. And he shall command the great deep, that it shall be driven back into the north countries, and the islands shall become one land. Okay. Again, we have this term, the great deep, being used in a mysterious context. I mean, the great deep will be driven back into the north countries, and the islands shall become one. We'll get back to that in just a second. Now, verse 24. And the land of Jerusalem and the land of Zion shall be turned back into their own place, and the earth shall be like it was in the days before it was divided. Now, that's really interesting. If you go back to Enoch's day, that is when we talk about the supercontinent Pangea, when everything was one landmass, and then you had this massive ocean. The Lord is saying that's what it's going to be like again. And that will be part of this great and terrible day of the Lord. And that is really interesting. But we're still going to get some more information that we need to consider these things in light of in verse 25. And the Lord, even the Savior, shall stand in the midst of his people and shall reign over all flesh. And they who are in the north countries shall come in remembrance before the Lord, and their prophets shall hear his voice, and shall no longer stay themselves, and they shall smite the rocks, and the ice shall flow down at their presence. Now, this is a really curious reference, again, because he is using this term north countries here. He just in a couple verses before, he said that the great deep is going to be driven back into the north countries. And now he's referring to the inhabitants of those north countries. They are going to come, and they are coming with their own prophets. So this is a group of the house of Israel that is completely separate from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the children of Joseph. That's curious. It's really curious. This should cause you to think back to the 10th article of faith. We believe in the literal gathering of the house of Israel and in the restoration of the lost tribes. This restoration event is what I believe that verse 26 is talking about. When this body comes from the north countries and the great deep is driven back. Now we get another curious passage in verse 27. And an highway shall be cast up in the midst of the great deep. So this body of people that are coming from the north countries, they are coming on a highway that is cast up out of the midst of the great deep. Now, I know that this sounds pretty mysterious, and we're going to unpack this a little bit, but let's keep going for a couple more verses before. Now I'm picking back up in verse 28. Their enemies shall become a prey unto them, meaning this group that is coming from the north countries. And in the barren deserts there shall come forth pools of living water, and the parched ground shall no longer be a thirsty land. And they shall bring forth their rich treasures unto the children of Ephraim my servants, and the boundaries of the everlasting hills shall tremble at their presence. So nothing in these verses has made this any less mysterious. In fact, the mystery surrounding this incredible host that's coming from the north countries only deepens with these passages. Let me say this a different way. So I know that this sounds very mysterious, and it would remain a mystery if not for all of these accounts that we have from Joseph Smith's day, where Joseph Smith explained exactly what these things mean. We just don't know about them because they're strange enough that we omit them. But let's look at some of these things because it radically changes the understanding of what these passages mean. So the first account that I am going to comes from an incredible interview that was conducted with Patriarch Homer Brown of the Granite Stake in Utah. Now, Patriarch Brown was the grandson of Benjamin Brown, and Joseph Smith was known to have hidden from the mob multiple times at the Browns' home in Nauvoo, Illinois. An interview with Patriarch Brown reviews what his grandparents told him that they learned from Joseph Smith when he was hiding from the mob at his family's home. Many other people corroborate similar teachings from the prophet. So this is not just some standalone freakish thing. And I'll prove that to you in a little bit. But let's start with this transcript from this interview with Brother Brown. Brother Brown, can you give us some light and explanation on the 5th verse, page 386 of the hymn book, hymn number 323, Enoch, the little pocket hymn book from 1905, which speaks of the 10 tribes of Israel on part of the earth which is now formed another planet, according to the composer Eliza R. Snow? Yes, sir, I think that I can answer that question. Sister Eliza R. Snow, when visiting my grandparents, was asked by my grandmother, Eliza, where did you get your idea about the lost 10 tribes being taken as you explained in your hymn on page 386 of the hymn book? She answered as follows, why, my husband the prophet told me about it. Have you any other information, Brother Brown, that your grandfather ever gave you containing any conversations with the prophet Joseph Smith on this subject? Yes, I have. One evening in Nauvoo, just after dark, somebody rapped at my grandfather's door very rigorously. Grandfather was reading the Doctrine and Covenants, which he laid aside. He rose hastily and answered the door. There he met the prophet Joseph Smith, who said, "Brother Brown, can you keep me overnight? The mobs are after me." Grandfather answered, "Yes, sir. It will not be the first time. Come on in," said the prophet, shutting the door quickly. He came and sat down. Grandmother said, "Brother Joseph, had you had your supper?" "No," he answered, "I have not." So she prepared a meal for him, and he ate it. Afterwards, they conversed relative to the principles of the gospel, and during the conversation, the 10 tribes were mentioned. Grandfather said, "Where are the 10 tribes?" He answered, "Come to the door, and I will show you. Come on, Sister Brown, I want you to see." It being a starlit night, the prophet said, "Brother Brown, can you show me the polar star?" "Yes, sir," he said, pointing to the North Star. "There it is." "Yes, I know," said the prophet, "but which one?" Then Grandfather said, "Can you see the points of the Great Dipper?" The prophet said, "Yes." "Trace those pointers, pointing to the largest star. That is the North Star." "You're correct," the prophet replied. "Now, do you discern that little twinkler to the right and below the polar star, which appears to be about 20 feet apart from here?" Grandfather answered, "Yes, sir." The prophet said, "Sister Brown, do you see that star also?" She answered, "Yes, sir." After entering the house, the prophet said, "Brother Brown, I noticed when I came in that you were reading the Doctrine and Covenants. Will you kindly get it?" He did so, and the prophet turned to what is now the 133rd section, and commencing at the 26th verse, he read to verse 34. I am going to read these just so that we have them in the right context. "And they who are in the north country shall come in remembrance before the Lord, and their prophets shall hear his voice, and shall no longer stay themselves. And they shall smite the rocks, and the ice shall flow down at their presence. And an highway shall be cast up in the midst of the great deep. Their enemies shall become a prey unto them. And in the barren deserts there shall come forth pools of living water, and the parched ground shall no longer be a thirsty land. And they shall bring forth their rich treasures unto the children of Ephraim my servants, and the boundaries of the everlasting hills shall tremble at their presence." After reading the 31st verse, he said, "Now let me ask you, what would cause the everlasting hills to tremble more than with the violence of 2 planets coming together? That planet on which they reside will return to this earth. Now what would cause the mountains of ice to melt quicker than the heat caused by the friction of 2 planets coming together? Did you ever see a meteor that was not red hot? So you see, that would cause the mountains of ice to melt." That's the account. This account comes from, okay, we're going to have to delete that little space. So that was taken from an interview with Patriarch Homer Brown, and you can easily access that for using your Google Thumbum. Now, just so that you know that this was not some crazy thing without any support, let's go to the Diaries of Wilford Woodruff, and you can find this in just looking at his diaries, or there was also a book on this, Waiting for World's End, which is all about his diaries. And you can find this on that book on page 238. And it says this: "President Young said he heard Joseph Smith say that the 10 tribes of Israel were on a portion of land separated from this earth." Okay? So that is President Wilford Woodruff, who became the prophet of the church, saying that the then prophet of the church, President Young, told him that the prophet before him, Joseph Smith, taught him that the lost 10 tribes were on a portion of the earth that had been removed. That sounds very similar to what Joseph Smith told the Browns, that the lost tribes were on a portion of this earth that would return, and when it did, it would cause the everlasting hills to tremble at their presence and the ice to flow down. So that is very interesting. Now, here is another example, and this comes from the Juvenile Instructor, volume 27, page 344. So this was material that the church itself published back in the day. Listen to this account. The Juvenile Instructor is quoting President George Albert Smith's wife and something that she said that she heard Joseph Smith say. Listen to this. "I heard Joseph Smith say, peradventure the 10 tribes were not on this globe, but on a portion of this earth cleaved off with them, and that it went flying into space, and when earth reels to and fro like a drunken man, and the stars from heaven fall, it would join on again." So here you have some very credible people saying some very curious things that they were taught by Joseph Smith regarding the meaning of that particular passage of Scripture in the Doctrine and Covenants. Now, let me share a couple of other examples of this, because I think it's really important that we demonstrate that this isn't just some isolated one-off teaching. This next account comes from the Journal of Samuel Hollister Rogers. And then he's literally quoting teachings from Joseph Smith from the winter of 1840 in the Vincent Knight home. And again, you can read this account in Samuel Hollister Rogers' journal on page 17. It says this, and again, he's just quoting Joseph Smith teaching. When the world was first made, it was a tremendous big thing. The Lord concluded it was too big. We read in the scriptures that in the days of Peleg, the world was divided, so the Lord divided the earth. When the 10 tribes of the children of Israel went to the north countries, he divided it again. So the earth has been divided and subdivided. We also read in the scriptures that the earth shall reel to and fro like a drunken man. What shall cause this earth to reel to and fro like a drunken man? We read that the stars shall fall to the earth like a fig falling from a tree. When these stars return to the place where they were taken from, it will cause the earth to reel to and fro. Not that the planets will come squarely against one another. In such case, both planets would be broken into pieces. But in their rolling motion, they will come together, where they were taken from, which will cause the earth to reel to and fro. So in this account, you have Joseph Smith teaching people in the Vincent Knight home in the winter of 1840 that the lost 10 tribes were going to return when the portion of the earth that was removed from the polar regions returns to that same region. This sounds very similar to the city of Enoch being restored to the Gulf of Mexico. Now, here's another example of Joseph Smith teaching this same thing. This comes from the biographical record of Martha Cragen Cox on page 104. Coming in one day and seeing my geography on my lap, he, Jacob Hambley, told me the prophet said to him that at the North Pole is a convex or cup-shaped depression, with the deepest sea resting there. The planet that belonged to that part of the world would in time return to its place, strike the earth at that part, complete the sphere, and the result would be a reeling to and fro like a drunken man by the earth. Okay, that is another account saying exactly the same kind of a thing. Now, it's important to realize that these different journals, they weren't readily accessible to people. So people aren't just making the same thing up. They're literally hearing it from the same source, and that source is Joseph Smith. Here you have another account. This comes from the Wandle Mace Journal, and you can read it on page 38 through 39. In the course of his, meaning Joseph's remarks, he spoke of the earth being divided at various times. He said, when Enoch and his city was taken away, a portion of the earth was taken and would be restored. Also, in the days of Peleg, the earth was divided. See Genesis chapter 10, verse 25. He then referred to the 10 tribes, saying, a long time ago, in the days of Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, when the 10 tribes were taken away and never heard of since, he said that the earth will be restored as at its beginning, and the last taken away will be the first to return. For the last shall be first, and the first shall be last in all things. He illustrated the return by saying, some of you, brethren, have been coming up the river on a steamboat, and while seated at the table, the steamboat runs a snag, which upsets the table and scatters the dishes. So it will be when these portions of the earth return, and it will make the earth reel to and fro like a drunken man, quoting the 24th chapter of Isaiah, 20th verse. When speaking of the return of the 10 tribes, he said, the mountains of ice shall flow down at their presence, and a highway shall be cast up in the midst of the great deep. Okay, so here you've got numerous different accounts that are essentially saying the exact same thing. You have prophets saying that Joseph Smith taught him these things, and you've got folks that were present when Joseph Smith talked about these things, sharing them. And frankly, it's hard to deny that this is what Joseph Smith believed. And you have another really interesting example of this that was provided in a publication from the church, the Millennial Star. And this will be the last example that I share on this, because I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here. But I just want to make sure that you fully realize that there are many people that bear witness that Joseph Smith really did talk about these things. Okay, this last example comes from a letter that was published in the Millennial Star. Joseph Fielding Smith and Parley P. Pratt. And Parley P. Pratt was an apostle at this time. Given that this is published by the church, they believed that it was true. The letter it's a question and answer. And Joseph Smith is asking Parley P. Pratt some questions, and Parley is responding to him, which was published in this star. So this comes from the 7th question. How can the stars fall from the heaven to the earth when they, as far as we know, are much larger than the earth? Answer. We are nowhere given to understand that all of the stars, or even many of them, will fall, but only as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when they are shaken with a mighty wind. The stars which will fall to the earth are fragments which have been broken off from the earth from time to time in the mighty convolutions of nature, some in the days of Enoch, and perhaps in the days of Peleg, and some with the 10 tribes, and some at the crucifixion of the Messiah. That one's pretty interesting. These all must be restored again at the time of the restitution of all things. This will restore the 10 tribes of Israel, and will also bring again Zion, even Enoch city. It will bring back the tree of life, which is in the midst of paradise of God, that you may partake of it. When these fragments, some of which are vastly larger than the present earth, are brought back and joined to this earth, it will cause a convolution of all nature. The graves of the saints will be opened, and they will rise from the dead, while the mountains will flow down, and the valleys shall rise, and the sea retire to its own place. The islands and continents will be removed, and earth will be rolled together as a scroll. The earth will be many times larger than it is now. If I have told you of earthly things, and ye believe not, what would you think if you were to be told of heavenly things? The Millennial Star, Volume 1, Number 10, February 1841, pages 270 or 257 to 59. That is a very interesting account. Now, all of these accounts seem to point directly back to this section of the Doctrine and Covenants. And this letter in the star seems to go back to the prior verses that were talking about the islands becoming one land. What Parley P. Pratt was saying is true, and that we're going to have the arm of the Lord being revealed to all nations is this black swan event that results in the earth becoming much larger than it presently is. Holy cow, that is going to be crazy. And if the world becomes much larger than it presently is, the surface area of the earth, which is now over 70% water, will now become much less. And you're going to have most of the earth be one entire landmass, and then the ocean will be just in the deepest point on the earth. That's crazy. But this is what Joseph Smith was clearly teaching people. And so I believe that this is the context that we need to understand these things from. It's the only context really that is consistent with the teachings of Joseph Smith. Any other context, you have to marginalize what Joseph Smith said and said, you know what, he didn't know what he was talking about. Joseph Smith, he was either a prophet or he wasn't. Okay, I 100% believe that Joseph Smith was a prophet, and he taught some wild and crazy things that don't fit neatly into the Come Follow Me manual, but they fit very well into the Black Swan Rising podcast. I'm talking about when he said that the beast of Revelation is actually an extraterrestrial beast that comes to the earth from another world apart from the human family. When he says that when the lost 10 tribes return, they are going to return in a fragment or upon a fragment of the earth that has been removed in a very similar fashion to the city of Enoch, and that when it is restored, that is going to make the earth wobble to and fro like a drunken man and cause the polar ice cap to melt. That's crazy. And this highway that's being cast up out of the midst of the great deep, the ocean is being driven away, and you are going to have a solid landmass. And it's going to be completely bonkers, friends. This speaks to a massive body of people that have their own prophets that will be returning in the last days. And I believe that this is the context that we need to understand this section from. So now we're going to pick back up in verse 32. And there they shall fall down and be crowned with glory, even in Zion, by the hands of the servants of the Lord, even the children of Ephraim. Now you will recall that when the last 10 tribes come, they are going to come to the children of Ephraim, and they're going to bring Ephraim their rich treasures. I believe that we can understand their rich treasures to be technologies that revolutionize the world as we know it. And those technologies will be given to the church. And there they will be crowned with glory by the children of Ephraim. I believe that this is referring to the temple ordinances that are administered by the children of Ephraim. That's pretty amazing. Now we go to verse 33. And they shall be filled with songs of everlasting joy. Behold, this is the blessing of the everlasting God upon the tribes of Israel, and the richer blessing upon the head of Ephraim and his fellows. Now, why does it say Ephraim and his fellows? This goes back to doing the works of Abraham. If you're the children of Abraham, you're his children because you're doing the works of Abraham. Regardless of what tribe of Israel you are from, if you are doing the works of the children of Ephraim, then you will receive the inheritance that is due to the children of Ephraim. That's why it says Ephraim and his fellows, his fellow laborers in the vineyard. Now we go to verse 35. And they also of the tribe of Judah, after their pain, shall be sanctified in holiness before the Lord, to dwell in his presence day and night forever and ever. This is talking about once the New Jerusalem is established in America, as we talked about in the prior episode, the Jews are going to be going through the second abomination of desolation. And that is the stout horn, the Antichrist, and the beast that are surrounding Jerusalem and sieging it for 3.5 years and putting the Jews through the ringer. And when they come through that, they will be holy. This is spoken of at length in Isaiah. I believe that this is Isaiah chapter 3 and 4, talking about everyone in Jerusalem that survives that day shall be holy. Okay, now we move on to the next section, or verse 36. And now verily saith the Lord, that these things might be made known amongst you, O inhabitants of the earth, I have sent forth mine angel flying through the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel, who hath appeared unto some, and hath committed it unto man, who shall appear unto many that dwell on the earth. He's talking about Moroni. This is why we have Moroni's on top of the temples, much to some people's chagrin. I love the fact that he is there. Now we go on to verse 37. And this gospel shall be preached unto every nation and kindred and tongue and people. And the servants of God shall go forth, saying with a loud voice, Fear God and give him glory, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made the heaven and the earth and the sea and the fountains of water. This is a reference, the fountains of water, to the pre-Diluvian flood in which the world was destroyed, and obviously a nod to the covenant which God made with both Enoch and Noah, that the earth would not be destroyed again at his coming by flood. Instead, it would be baptized by fire. Now, verse 40. Calling upon the name of the Lord day and night, saying, Oh, that thou wouldst rend the heavens, and that thou wouldst come down, that the mountains might flow down at thy presence. This is a reference, again, going back to the Book of Enoch. Enoch uses the same language, and this is really cool because the Book of Enoch was not going to be available in the United States for several more years at this point. The fact that this, later on in this vision, Enoch is actually named. There are not very many revelations, and you can see that in verse 54, we'll get there in a bit, where they talk about Enoch, this enigmatic figure from the Bible who walked with God and was no more, for God took him. That's all the world knows of Enoch. But in this revelation, it's quoting from Enoch. We already had the reference, the nod to the Book of Enoch when the Lord said that the ungodly would be removed. It comes from the Book of Jude, which of course was quoting the Book of Enoch. And now we have this reference. Let me just read that verse from the Book of Enoch so that you know what I'm talking about. Okay, this comes from the Book of Enoch, I'm going to start at chapter 1, Verse 3, concerning the elect I said and took up my parable concerning them. The Holy Great One will come forth from his dwelling, and the eternal God will tread upon the earth, and appear from his camp, and appear in the strength of his might from the heaven of heavens. And all shall be smitten with fear, and the watchers shall quake, and great fear and trembling shall seize them unto the ends of the earth. And the high mountains shall be shaken, and the high hills shall be made low, and shall melt like wax before the flame. And the earth shall be wholly rent in sunder, and all that is upon the earth shall perish, and there shall be a judgment upon all men. But with the righteous he will make peace, and he will protect the elect, and mercy shall be upon them, and all shall belong to God. So that to me sounds like what Jesus Christ is saying in this particular passage here. That the heavens are going to be rent, and God is going to come down out of his place, and that the mountains are going to flow down at his presence, and that the earth is going to be shaken violently and be torn asunder. This sounds like Joseph Smith was talking about. These former fragments of the earth are going to merge with it, and the earth is going to be radically changed, and it's going to be so incredible, and the wicked are going to be purged, but the righteous, they are going to survive this. So I think that this is the context that we are to understand what the Lord is talking about. Now let's pick this back up in verse 41. You're going to see these verses continue to mirror this Enoch language. And it shall be answered upon their heads, for the presence of the Lord shall be as the melting fire that burneth, and as the fire which causeth the waters to boil. O Lord, thou shalt come down to make thy name known to all thy adversaries, and all nations shall tremble at thy presence. And when thou dost terrible things that they looked not for. Now, here in verse 130, or in chapter 33, the Lord is saying that the wicked are going to tremble when they see these things. And Enoch specifically called out the watchers, saying that they were going to return in the last days. If you look at the Book of Enoch, it says after 70 generations from the flood, the watchers would return. If you assume that the average lifespan of a human being prior to modern medicine was about 62 years, and that's accurate, assuming that you survived childbirth, 70 generations would put it right at our day. And therefore, it's no surprise to me that we're getting all of these accounts of unidentified aerial phenomenon flying around in our skies, and that disclosure is imminent. And I think we're seeing the Book of Enoch and Doctrine and Covenants section 133 playing out before our eyes. But this is the Lord saying, listen, I got this. The wicked, they need to watch out, but the righteous, I've got them. The wicked, they think they have everything in hand, but the Lord is going to do terrible things that they look not for. Now we pick this back up in verse 44. When thou comest down, and the mountains flow down at thy presence, thou shalt meet him who rejoiceth and worketh righteousness, who remembereth thee in thy ways. For since the beginning of the world have not men heard, nor perceived by the ear, neither hath been eye seen, O God, besides thee, how great things thou hast prepared for him that wait for thee. So incredible black swan events are going to be the defining events of the great and terrible day of the Lord. We've been talking about a lot of these events on this podcast. Now we go to verse 46. And it shall be said, who is this that cometh down from God in heaven, dyed with garments, yea, from the regions which are not known, clothed in his glorious apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength? And he shall say, I am he who spake in righteousness, mighty to save. And the Lord shall be red in his apparel, and his garments like him that treadeth the winepress, or the wine vat. And so great shall be the glory of his presence, that the sun shall hide its face in shame, and the moon shall withhold its light, and the stars shall be hurled from their places. Now, again, Joseph Smith said that when the stars are hurled from their places, those are former fragments that are being restored to the earth in the restitution of all things. Now we go to verse 50. And his voice shall be heard, I have trodden the winepress alone. I have brought judgment upon all people, and none were with me. and I have trampled them in my fury, and I did tread upon them in mine anger, and their blood have I sprinkled upon my garments, and stained all my raiment. For this was the day of vengeance, which was in my heart. And now the year of my redeemed is come, and they shall mention the loving kindness of their Lord, and all that has been bestowed upon them according to his goodness and according to his loving kindness forever. In all their afflictions he was afflicted, and the angel of his presence saved them. Now, this part of this revelation reminds me a great deal about Isaiah chapter 49, wherein Zion is thinking that they have been forgotten by the Lord because they are experiencing all of these tribulations. They're wondering, listen, if we're the Lord's chosen people, where is he? Why are we going through all of these terrible trials? And that's why the Lord is saying, listen, in all of your afflictions, I have been afflicted. And in Isaiah 49, he says that he hid his face from us for a small moment, but that in his everlasting kindness, he will remember us. And, that he could never forget us because he has engraven us upon the palms of his hands. This is the same God that is now coming down from the heavens and redeeming his people from the wicked with incredible power and majesty. Now we pick back up in verse 54. Yea, and Enoch also, and they who were with him, the prophets who were before him, and Noah also, and they who were with him, and Moses also, and they who were before him, and from Moses to Elijah, and from Elijah to John, who were with Christ in his resurrection. Now, this is interesting. There are 5 prophets that are named: Enoch, Noah, Moses, Elijah, and John, meaning John the Revelator, John the Beloved, John the Apostle. Out of these 5 people that are named, 4 of them were translated beings. Enoch, Moses, Elijah, and John were all translated. This is not coincidental. Noah, the second of these, received a covenant that the earth would not be destroyed again by water. He received the Enochian covenant that Enoch had obtained. Enoch was promised that his seed would always remain upon the earth, and Noah inherited that same covenant in the same way that Jacob inherited the covenant of Abraham. I think that it is significant, particularly in the context of what we have learned on the Black Swan Rising podcast, when the Lord references essentially all of these people who have been translated, because translated beings are administering the gospel to people of other worlds. That's just what they do. Okay, let's look at Enoch. We know from Moses chapter 7, we talked about this in the prior episode, that Enoch said that his city that has been visited from people from all the creations which God has made. He has been ministering to the inhabitants of other worlds. Now, let's look at the next person referenced here, Moses. If you look at Numbers chapter 14, verse 12, this is right after Joshua and Caleb come back in along with the other Israelites that were sent in to scope out the lands of Canaan for 40 days. And everyone says, yep, the lands of Canaan are totally awesome. They're flowing with milk and honey. You should see the size of the grape clusters in this land. But there's no way that we can ever defeat the Canaanites. They are all giants, and we are grasshoppers in their sight and in our own sight. And only Joshua and Caleb said, listen, the Lord just divided the sea. He's got this. We can do anything that he wants us to do. And because Israel was doubting the Lord, in Numbers 14:12, the Lord is so frustrated with Israel that he tells Moses that he's going to smite Israel and disinherit them, and that he is going to raise up a greater nation than Israel from Moses specifically. Interestingly enough, Moses was never permitted to go into the land of Israel. Instead, he was translated and taken up, where I think the Lord has made good on this promise. This isn't the only time the Lord told Moses that either. If you look at Moses or in Exodus 32, verse 10, right after Israel makes this golden calf, this image of Hathor, is worshiping it, God says that he is going to destroy Israel and make a greater nation from Moses to replace them. And in both of these cases, Moses advocates for Israel that the Lord not destroy them at that time. But I do believe that the reason that God translated Moses was so that he could make good on this promise. And I think that we're going to see some legit cray things in the last days that are pertaining to the restoration of Moses's great nation that will also be part of the house of Israel, but will be far greater than Israel was in its time here on this earth. So you're going to have Moses's group coming back. You're going to have the lost tribes of Israel coming back, and they're going to be bringing back their rich treasures, and that's going to be a game changer. And then you're going to have the city of Enoch that's coming back. You're going to have three separate groups of people, and with the city of Enoch, you've got the people of Melchizedek that were also translated up. And the world, all of these wicked people, they're going to be swept off, and the Lord is going to replace them with people that are covenant makers and keepers. And ours is the choice of whether we are going to be such people or whether we are going to be replaced by such people. It's the pattern of the Book of Mormon. Happened to the Jaredites, happened to the Nephites, and the Lord said it is going to happen again to the Gentiles in the last days if they don't get with the program. And that's what we're talking about here. So then you go to Elijah. Elijah was taken up in a flaming chariot. And he, obviously, since he's translated being, he's administering to the inhabitants of other worlds. This is what Joseph Smith said happens. Now, John the Revelator was also translated. And Joseph Smith taught that John the Revelator was preparing the lost tribes for their return to the earth. And we spoke in last week's episode about that Russian man who encountered John on another planet and then went and saw the light coming from the New Jerusalem. There's some crazy things, but I think we are going to be flabbergasted by some of this stuff that's going to be happening. This is, in my opinion, when the Lord says that his arm is going to be made bare in the eyes of all the nations, that this is how that's going to be done. So we are still in verse 55. So we've just left off where God is going through and he's cherry picking all these translated beings. And then he goes that in addition to these translated beings, that all the holy apostles with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob shall be in the presence of the Lamb. All of the covenant makers and keepers are going to be present there. And if we are covenant makers and keepers, we can be present there as well. Everyone else, they're going to be wiped off. Now in verse 56, and the graves of the saints shall be opened, and they shall come forth and stand on the right hand of the Lamb when he shall stand upon Mount Zion and upon the holy city, the New Jerusalem. And they shall sing the song of the Lamb day and night forever and ever. This happened when Christ came the first time, when he was resurrected. The righteous were resurrected both in Jerusalem and in the Americas, and they administered to people. Christ is saying that same thing is going to happen again. When he comes again, the righteous will be lifted up. And so if you're having loved ones that are losing or giving their lives or just dying of whatever reasons prior to the millennium, they're not going to be gone for very long, friends. They're going to be coming right back. Now we go to verse 57. And for this cause, that men might be partakers of the glories which were to be revealed, the Lord sent forth the fullness of his gospel, his everlasting covenant, reasoning in plainness and simplicity, to prepare the weak for those things which are coming on the earth. To prepare the weak for those things which are coming on the earth. He's talking about all these cray things that are literally coming and going to happen on the earth. These former fragments that are going to be restored, the restoration of the lost tribes of Israel, the watchers coming from the ends of heaven and re-corrupting the earth as has been done in times past. These are the things that have been revealed so that even the weakest amongst us can be safe through the inoculation of knowledge. And I guarantee you, friends, when the Lord is talking about preparing the weak things to be able to withstand this, he's talking about me. I am weak. And if he can help me, he can help you. Now, again, here in verse 58, to prepare the weak for those things which are coming on the earth, and for the Lord's errand in the day when the weak shall confound the wise, and the little one become a strong nation, and two shall put their tens of thousands to flight. The Lord is going to thrash the nations with the weak. He loves doing this. He loves taking weak people that are nothing in the eyes of the world and using them to thrash the nations. To me, that is very hopeful because, again, I am weak. Now, what does it mean when he says that two shall put their tens of thousands to flight? I think that he is saying that these two prophets in Jerusalem that are able to literally hold off the armies of the Antichrist and the beast, that they're not going to be a one-off anomaly, that this is going to become widespread, that the weak are all going to be enabled in this manner. This is what is meant by 1 Nephi chapter 14, verse 14, when it says that the saints and the covenant people will both be armed with the power and glory of God. The reason that they will be armed is so that they can put off the strong things. Now, in verse 59, and by the weak things of the earth shall the Lord thresh the nation by the power of his Spirit. And for this cause, these commandments were given. They were commanded to be kept from the world in the day that they were given, but now are to go forth into all flesh. And this according to the mind and the will of the Lord, who ruleth over all flesh. So, obviously, when this revelation was initially given, there were things that were held back, but the Lord said that now these things are to go forth into the world. And Joseph Smith did not give all of the explanations for the meaning of these things in any sort of official church capacity. He gave these interpretations that we went over earlier in this episode. He gave them to private groups of individuals, but those interpretations were written down and they were kept, and they are meant to be understood by the saints in general in the days that these things are to happen. Now, sadly, these things are so incredible that most people just aren't going to believe them. The Lord is going to try the faith of his people. He wants a people that can recognize his voice and the promptings of the Holy Ghost. And those are the people that will be able to abide the day and no one else. And that is pretty scary. Now we move on to verse 61. And this according to the mind and the will of the Lord, who ruleth over all flesh. And unto him that repenteth and sanctifieth himself before the Lord shall be given eternal life. And upon them that hearken not unto the voice of the Lord shall be fulfilled that which was written by the prophet Moses, that they should be cut off from amongst the people. Now, this is a direct reference back to Christ's message to the Nephites, that if they reject his gospel, then a remnant of Jacob shall come and wipe them out, and that no weapon that the Gentiles have will prosper against them, and that this remnant of Jacob will pour out vengeance and fury upon them, such as they have not heard. Then he goes on to verse 64. And also that which was written by the prophet Malachi, for behold, the day shall come that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yea, all that do wickedly shall be burned as stubble. And that day cometh, shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, and it shall leave them neither root nor branch. Now, curiously, this same revelation said that the angel of the Lord had proclaimed the everlasting gospel. I mentioned that angel of the Lord was Moroni, and Moroni came to Joseph Smith 5 times in a 24-hour period, and he quoted all kinds of scriptures to him. And the scriptures that he quoted they could not be more relevant to this message that we're going through right now. But this particular verse that the Lord just quoted from Malachi, Moroni also quoted it to Joseph Smith, but he added something that makes this verse even that much more impactful. Listen to how Moroni quoted this. For behold, the day cometh that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yea, all that do wickedly shall burn as stubble. For they that come shall burn them, saith the Lord, that shall leave them neither root nor branch. So this all ties back to this remnant of Jacob that's coming, the lost tribes that are returning, and that will purge America of all wickedness. That's what these things are talking about. And it's clear that they were written in this way so that only those with eyes that would humble themselves before the Lord and consider themselves to be weak and foolish before the Lord would be able to be taught these things. Because the proud and all they that do wickedly, they're not going to abide that day. They will be consumed. Now we move on to verse 65. Wherefore, this shall be the answer of the Lord unto them. In that day when I came unto my own, no man amongst you received me, and ye were driven out. When I called again, there was none of you to answer. Yet my arm was not shortened at all, that I could not redeem, neither my power to deliver. Behold, at my rebuke I dry up the sea. I make the rivers a wilderness, their fish to stink, and die for thirst. I clothe the heavens with blackness, and make sackcloth their covering. And this shall ye have of my hand, that ye shall lie down in sorrow. Behold, and lo, there are none to deliver you. For ye obeyed not my voice when I called to you out of the heavens. Ye believed not my servants when they were sent unto you. Ye received them not. Wherefore they sealed up the testimony and bound up the law, and ye were delivered over unto darkness. These shall go away into outer darkness, where there is weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. Behold, the Lord your God hath spoken it. Amen. Holy smokes. What a way to close that epic revelation. Saying basically, friends, you need to humble yourselves and you need to be seeking to be taught by the Lord, because only they that seek are going to find the answers. These things have been withheld from the proud and the wicked for a reason. The humble are going to receive these messages, but the wicked are going to consider them foolishness, and they're going to not only mock those that try to help them to see, but they're going to be replaced by a more righteous people. And this is the same message, again, going back to the message that Christ delivered to the Nephites, where he told them, listen, friends, when these things happen, the kings are going to shut their mouths. They're going to see things that are just simply unbelievable. And even if a man declared it to them in plainness, they're not going to believe it. Friends, why don't they believe it? Because they're black swan events. Normalcy bias. Things like this cannot happen. The world is far too normal for these kinds of things to happen. But guess what? They are going to happen. And we better take the Lord up when he commanded us to study the words of Isaiah. He commanded us to do those things so that we would be prepared. And when Mormon tried to write all of the Lord's explanations about these words in 3 Nephi chapter 26, the Lord told them, no, don't do that. I gave them what the Father commanded me to give them. And if they receive that, then through the power of the Holy Ghost, they will receive all the understanding that they need. But if not, then they will be left in the dark. And curiously enough, that is Nephi. This is his exact message that he left for us after he transcribed his 19 Isaiah chapters and begged us to make a study of them. He concluded that account with a pleading, and yet knowing at the same time that most of us were simply not going to take him up on it. And this is why he said what he said in 2 Nephi chapter 32 in verses 7 and 4, which read as follows. And now I, Nephi, cannot say more. The Spirit stoppeth mine utterance, and I am left to mourn because of the unbelief and the wickedness and the ignorance and the stiff-neckedness of men. For they will not search knowledge, nor understand great knowledge when it is given unto them in plainness, even as plain as the word can be. Wherefore, now after I have spoken these words, meaning after he's transcribed all of these Isaiah words, if ye cannot understand them, it will be because ye ask not, neither do ye knock. Wherefore ye are not brought into the light, but must perish in the dark. And with this, friends, we conclude this season of the Black Swan Rising podcast with the invitation that you seek, for they that seek shall find. Until next time, friends, God bless.
You have just finished an episode of the Black Swan Rising podcast, an L10 production, hosted by Michael B. Rush. For show notes, transcriptions, and extras, please visit www.theblackswanrisingpodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, click the share button icon and send it to your friends and family. This will help to ensure the continued publication of future content. Michael thanks you in advance for sharing and looks forward to seeing you next time. Until then, keep seeking, for they that seek shall find.